3 very disturbing true scary stories. There are places where darkness lingers, not the kind that fades with morning light, but the kind that seeps into the soil, into the wood of old farmhouses, into the memory of entire communities. The kind that refuses to be forgotten. Tonight, we're going to sit with 3 such stories. 3 cases that defy easy answers. 3 mysteries where the truth seems to slip just beyond our grasp, no matter how hard we reach for it. Let me tell you about them. The Hinterkaifeck murders. In the spring of 1922, there was a farmstead in Bavaria. It sat alone in the countryside, roughly 70 kilometers north of Munich, between the small towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. The place was called Hinterkaifeck, which translates roughly to behind Kaifeck. Behind, isolated, hidden from view. The Gruber family lived there. Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, worked the land with the kind of quiet determination that came from generations of farming. His wife was 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, lived there too, along with her 2 children. 7-year-old, named after her grandmother, and 2-year-old Joseph, barely more than a baby. They kept to themselves, mostly. The way families do when they live far from town, when their nearest neighbors are fields and forest. But in the days before March 31st, 1922, something changed at Hinterkaifeck. Andreas told a neighbor about footprints he'd found in the snow. They led from the dark line of trees to the farmhouse, but there were no footprints leading away. Just tracks coming in, disappearing at the door like whoever made them had simply vanished into the house itself. Then there was the newspaper. Andreas discovered it one morning, a Munich publication lying on their property. No one in the family subscribed to it. No one could explain how it had arrived. The keys to the house went missing. Andreas searched for them, but they were simply gone. And at night, the family heard footsteps in the attic. Andreas climbed up there with a lamp, searching the shadows between the rafters. He found nothing, but the footsteps continued. 6 months earlier, the family's maid had quit. When asked why, she said the farmhouse felt haunted. She wouldn't elaborate. She simply left and refused to return. On March 31st, 1922, a new maid arrived. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She was 44 years old. Her sister walked with her to the farmstead, stayed briefly, then left. Maria had worked at Hinterkaifeck for exactly 1 day when she was murdered. Late that evening, someone lured the family to the barn. One by one, they were called out through the stable. One by one, they were killed with a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. The weapon was later found in the loft of the barn itself. 4 bodies were discovered stacked in the barn. Andreas, his wife, their daughter Victoria, the 7-year-old girl. Inside the house, investigators found little Joseph in his crib and Maria Baumgartner in her bedroom. All 6 had been struck in the head with such force that the ceiling showed gouge marks from the upswing of the weapon. But here's what makes this case truly disturbing. For 3 days after the murders, someone stayed at Hinterkaifeck. They fed the livestock. They ate food from the kitchen. They used the fireplace. Smoke rose from the chimney. The animals were tended. And all the while, 6 bodies lay in the barn and in the house. On April 4th, 1922, neighbors became concerned. Young hadn't been to school. No one had seen the family. A man named Lawrence Schlittenbauer went to investigate, along with 2 others. They found the bodies. The investigation that followed examined over 100 suspects, but the case was never solved. The murderer was never identified. The motive remains unknown to this day. In 2007, students from a German police academy re-examined the case using modern forensic techniques. They identified what they believed to be a prime suspect, but out of respect for surviving relatives, the name was never released publicly. The evidence was too old, too contaminated by the dozens of curious locals who had walked through the crime scene in 1922. The farmstead at Hinterkaifeck was demolished in 1923. Today, a small memorial marks the spot where it once stood. But the question remains, who was in that house? Who stayed for 3 days with the dead? And why did they come at all? The ISDAL woman. On November 29, 1970, a father and his 2 young daughters were hiking through a valley near Bergen, Norway. The valley is called Istillen, which means Ice Valley. Locals sometimes refer to it as Death Valley because of the treacherous terrain. Among the rocks, in a small clearing, they found the body of a woman. She was lying on her back in an unusual position, with her head pointing downhill. Her body had been badly burned. Her face was destroyed beyond recognition. The front of her torso, her neck, most of her hair, all charred. Next to her lay bottles with their labels scraped off. Jewelry, a watch, an umbrella, the remains of nylon stockings and rubber boots. The placement of these objects seemed deliberate, almost ceremonial, according to the forensic investigators who examined the scene. An autopsy determined the woman had died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and an overdose of sleeping pills. Between 50 and 70 Fenimal brand sleeping pills had been in her system. Soot was found in her lungs, meaning she was still alive when she burned. There was bruising on her neck, possibly from a fall or a blow. But who was she? 3 days after the discovery, investigators found 2 suitcases at the Bergen railway station. Inside were wigs, clothing without labels. All identifying information had been carefully removed from every item. Eczema cream with the names scratched off, non-prescription glasses, maps and timetables, money from multiple countries, a notepad. Police were able to decode the notepad. It contained what appeared to be dates and locations. Following this trail, they discovered the woman had traveled throughout Norway and Europe using at least 8 different fake identities and passports. She had checked into hotels in Oslo, Trondheim, Stavanger, and Paris. She always gave her nationality as Belgian. She filled out forms in German or French, but the addresses she listed were fake. The street names didn't exist. Hotel staff remembered her as fashionable, quiet, and serious. She spoke poor English but fluent German and Flemish. One witness saw her dining near 2 German Navy personnel. The names she used were all different. Alexia Zonmersche, Vera Jall, Fenella Locke, Elizabeth Lienhauer, Genevieve Lancia, each one a carefully constructed fiction. Analysis of her teeth revealed she had 14 fillings and several gold crowns, unusual for someone of her apparent age and not typical for Norway. Isotope analysis of her tooth enamel suggested she had spent her childhood somewhere along the border between France and Germany. She appeared to be between 25 and 40 years old, closer to 40, according to later analysis. In 1970, Bergen was home to Norway's largest naval base. Secret trials of the Penguin missile system were taking place in the area. The Cold War was at its height. When Norwegian intelligence officials examined the case, they noted that the woman's movements corresponded to the locations and timing of top-secret military activities. Was she a spy? The tradecraft suggested it. The multiple identities, the coded notes, the careful erasure of all identifying information, the methodical movements through strategic locations. Or was she running from something, from someone? 5 days before her body was found, a 26-year-old man was hiking in the same valley. He encountered a well-dressed woman who seemed terrified. She was being followed by 2 men in dark coats. Before he could react, all 3 had disappeared into the forest. When he later heard about the body, he contacted police. He was told to forget about it. His report was never officially recorded. The case was closed in February 1971. The official verdict: probable suicide. But many of the investigators admitted privately they didn't believe it. The woman was buried in an unmarked grave using Catholic rites, as she had used the names of saints on her hotel forms. Only police attended her funeral. A zinc coffin was used to preserve her remains in case someone came forward to identify her. No one ever did. The case was reopened in 2016. Modern DNA analysis was performed. International notices were issued through Interpol. Thousands of people worldwide have examined the evidence, proposed theories, followed leads. Recent investigations have uncovered possible connections to Swiss banking, Palestinian terrorism funding, and Cold War espionage networks. But nothing has been proven. Every answer leads to more questions. more than 50 years later, the Istil woman remains unidentified. Someone, somewhere, knew her real name. Perhaps they still do. But the woman in Ice Valley took her secrets with her, erased as completely as the labels she cut from her clothing. The Dyatilovi Pass Incident. In January 1959, 10 young people set out on a skiing expedition across the northern Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union. They were students and recent graduates, mostly from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. All were experienced winter hikers and skiers. The youngest was 20. The oldest was 38. Their leader was a 23-year-old radio engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. The route they planned would take them across 190 miles in 16 days. It was classified as a Category 3 expedition, the most difficult designation. But this group was prepared. They had done this before. They knew the mountains. They knew the cold. On January 28th, one member of the group, Yuri Yudin, had to turn back due to illness. He said goodbye to his friends and watched them disappear into the snow. He would be the only survivor. The group was expected to send a telegram from the village of Vizhay when they completed their route, around February 12th. When no message came, there was initial hesitation to sound an alarm. Heavy snowstorms had been reported in the area. It was assumed the hikers were simply waiting out the weather somewhere safe. But by February 20th, with still no word, search parties were organized. On February 26th, searchers found the tent on the slope of a mountain called Kalet Siakal. The name translates to Dead Mountain in the language of the indigenous Mansi people. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not torn in panic, but deliberately slashed. Personal belongings, warm clothing, and boots were still inside. The hikers had left in extreme haste, some wearing only socks or a single shoe. In the bitter cold of the Ural winter, where temperatures can drop to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, they had fled into the night barely dressed. The first 2 bodies were found on February 27th, nearly a mile from the tent, beneath a cedar tree. The bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were discovered near the remains of a fire. They wore minimal clothing. Both had died of hypothermia. Over the following days, 3 more bodies were found at intervals between the cedar tree and the tent. They were positioned as though they had been trying to make their way back to the camp. Igor Dyatlov himself was found about 300 meters from the tree. Then Zenaida Kolmogorova. Then Rustam Slobodin. All 3 had died of hypothermia as well. But the search did not end there. The last 4 bodies were not discovered until May, after significant snow melt. They were found in a ravine, approximately 250 feet from the cedar tree. These 4 had not died of cold. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov had massive chest fractures, the kind of trauma typically seen in car accidents. Their ribs were shattered with such force that a medical examiner stated no human could have delivered such blows. Nikolai Thibox-Brignol's skull was fractured. Alexander Kolvatov had severe injuries as well. And Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue. Some of the clothing worn by these 4 showed traces of radioactive contamination, though this could potentially be explained by the fact that some members of the group had previously been in areas affected by the Kishtim nuclear disaster 2 years earlier. The Soviet investigation concluded that the group had died from what they termed a compelling natural force. No crime had been committed. The case was closed in May 1959, barely 3 months after the hikers had disappeared. The files were sent to a secret archive. But what compelling natural force cuts a tent from the inside? What makes experienced hikers flee into deadly cold without their boots? What causes injuries comparable to high-speed impacts in the middle of a remote mountain pass? Over the decades, theories have proliferated. Military weapons testing, secret parachute mines, infrasound-induced panic, indigenous attacks, even Yeti or extraterrestrial involvement. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. In 2021, scientists published a study proposing that a rare slab avalanche, caused by unusual wind conditions and the specific way the hikers had cut into the slope to pitch their tent, could explain both the sudden evacuation and the severe injuries. The theory suggests that after the hikers went to sleep, a delayed collapse of accumulated snow created a small but devastating avalanche that struck the tent with tremendous force. Panicked, injured, and disoriented, they cut their way out and fled downhill. Some died of exposure trying to return. Others, more severely injured, succumbed to their wounds in the ravine. It's a plausible explanation, perhaps even the most plausible. But it doesn't account for everything. The radioactivity, the missing tongue, the reports of glowing orbs seen in the sky by other witnesses in the area that night. The fact that some investigators who worked the original case said they were ordered to ignore certain evidence and close the inquiry. The mountain pass where this happened is now called Dyatlov Pass, named after the young man who led his friends into the winter wilderness. A memorial stands there, 9 names carved in stone. And the questions remain, suspended in the cold mountain air like the breath of ghosts. 3 stories, 3 unsolved mysteries, separated by decades and thousands of miles, but connected by the same fundamental truth. There are some things we may never fully understand. The person who stayed at Hinterkaifeck, living among the dead. The woman in Ice Valley, with 9 different names and none of them real. The force that drove 9 experienced hikers into the frozen night. These cases remind us that the world still holds secrets, that sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite modern science and technology and thousands of hours of investigation, the darkness keeps what it takes. If you found these stories as unsettling as I did, I'd appreciate it if you'd like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more dark tales like these. And I'll see you in the next one, where we'll explore more of the mysteries that refuse to let us sleep soundly. Until then, stay safe in the dark.